I'm super excited today because we're actually going to finish CHROMETHEUS. Finally, after what, 5 months? I think I started this build 5 months ago or something like that. It's finally happening today, guys. I couldn't be more stoked. And we don't really have that much to do. I already cleaned the radiators and I already cut down the tubes. I'll go over the process with that. But all we really have left to do is install those tubes, metal tubing by the way, and fill the loop, and we're done. And that's it. And then we'll do some testing afterwards just to check temps, make sure everything's in order, and see how this guy's performing. Well, I guess we can talk about the metal tubing, because that's the big thing for this build, for me anyway, was getting acquainted with metal tubes for the first time, and it actually went a lot more smoothly than I anticipated. So just to recap on how I cut this up and stuff, if you guys remember, I first made all of the runs with PET, so just regular standard PET tubing. This would serve as a template for measuring our metal tubes, or measuring and cutting our metal tubes. So when I was ready to cut them, I basically took an uncut piece of the metal tubing, which is already pre-bent at 90 degrees, and I took whatever template, I took a template and put it on top, rested it on top of that metal tube, and then I would score it, score the ends with a razor, make little indents on the metal tube so I'd know where to cut. But because it's really slippery and the tube wouldn't stay exactly on the metal piping, I put some double-sided tape on the metal tube so that it would kind of stick and stay in place. That way I'd have a super precise measurement when scoring it on either end. After that, I took the double-sided tape off and I was ready for cutting. So I took a C-clamp and a block of wood along with another piece of tube just to give me more even pressure on the metal pipe. And then I clamped that to the desk or the table, and I took my little pipe cutting tool and kept going around and tightening it gradually until it cut all the way through the pipe. I did that to both ends, and then I was pretty much ready for sanding and deburring. So I had a little deburring tool. It's pretty cheap. You just go on the inside with it, makes the inside, the inner lip nice and smooth. And then I did the same thing with the outer edges using 320 grit sandpaper. So I just kind of, worked it at a 45-degree angle until it was pretty much smooth all around. And the reason for doing this is so that you don't cut through the O-rings when you insert the piping into the fittings. That's really important because the O-rings are there to create a seal so you don't leak, but if those are torn, then that can happen. So at that point, I was pretty much ready to clean all the tubes. So I bought a kit of Mayhem's Blitz, or it's Mayhem's Blitz kit. It's like a 2-part kit, and it basically, well, I have the instruction manual here. It does things like rapid neutralization of surface rust, contamination and oxidation, rigorous removal of mineral scale deposits, excellent suspension of particulates, and that sort of thing. So I let that sit overnight for about 15 hours or so. Same way I cleaned the radiators, in fact, using that kit. And then after rinsing them thoroughly with distilled water, they are now ready for insertion. Woohoo! So yeah, that's where we're at right now. Also, I installed the fans finally. So after I put the radiators back in, after they were all cleaned, I installed our NF F12s from Noctua. We've got 7 of these bad boys in here, 3 down below, 3 up top, and 1 at the rear. And yeah, I mean, I was going back and forth on what fans to use for this build. I was considering the Lian Li Bora fans because they've got that CNC machined aluminum on them that would kind of match CHROMETHEUS's sort of chrome theme, but they're RGB fans, and there's no way in hell I was putting RGB fans in here, regardless of how well they matched apart from that. So, and these are just really good performing fans, some of the best on the market, honestly. I still think it looks fantastic in black. Who knows? Maybe down the line, if we do a CHROMETHEUS 2.0 update, we can play around with the fans. I feel like there's very limited options though when it comes to fans with naturally chromed finishing. But that aside, you can see that just a quick little note here. I actually put some black electrical tape over the little brown Noctua logo, because there's brown Noctua logos on each of the fans, and it was just driving me nuts. Just that little speck of brown, I was going insane. My OCD was going bonkers. So I just put some electrical tape there to black it out. Probably the finest mod I've ever done, if I do say so myself. And then pretty much that's all for the fans, I think. Oh yeah, so that's a lot of fans to wire up. To help me with that, I'm using EK Loop Connect right there. It comes with an adhesive backing, so I just stuck it to the back of the motherboard tray. It's pretty awesome, actually. Uses SATA power, and it can connect up to 6 PWM fans and 6 addressable RGB devices, along with other stuff for custom water cooling that we're not using right now. But it also connects to the motherboard directly via the USB 2.0 header instead of just another 4-pin PWM connection. So there's actually a EK software that you can use to interface and control the fans with, which I've never used before. Pretty excited to check that out later. Finally got around to populating our Hyper M.2 card from Asus. with 4 2 terabyte NVMe drives, PCIe Gen 4. These are Corsair MP600 drives. So we have a total of 8 terabytes. This is just going to be our working storage for all the footage that I'll be editing. Again, this is a content creation build. So yeah, we've got a beast of a storage solution here. I still haven't populated this DIMM.2 module. I was planning to put a 1 terabyte drive in here and then a 500 gig drive. So the 500 gig would be our C drive and then a 1 terabyte for just other things. Games potentially. I mean, if I ever do want a game on Chrometheus, I'd like to have the option to do so, and I don't really want to put games on the working drive. So yeah, we'll have 1.5 terabytes of PCIe Gen 4 storage here at some point. I can always add that later. I'm just going to put just a temporary drive in here that's got Windows preloaded on it so we can get on with the video and stuff. But yeah, so in total, it'll have just under 10 terabytes in the system, all PCIe Gen 4 NVMe storage, which I'm pretty stoked about. And I think, oh yeah, I should probably mention, a lot of you guys were saying, you know, because in the previous video, I was having issues trying to line up these two fittings, or I think, you know, some of the fittings in particular with the distro plate. It would have been a lot easier had I just used a standard like EK block, just a regular water block. But because I'm using the mono block, the inlets and outlets are obviously in different positions, so it kind of throws everything off. A lot of you guys in the comments were suggesting, well, if you just, you know, move the slide the distro plate up, that'll fix all your problems. Not really, because while it might actually line up things perfectly for, like, let's say these two fittings, it would then throw everything off for like the GPU. So in the end, I ended up leaving the distro plate as is and kind of have this weird wonky workaround solution with a couple right angle fittings to get it really lined up with that. This fitting was actually a little bit lower before because I had a longer adapter here that I eventually swapped out for this little shorty so that it could line up perfectly with this. It just wasn't working when it was a little bit lower. With that configuration, I just couldn't find a way for it to line up with this port, but it's all nice and plumb now. And what else? Oh, the cables are in. I don't think you guys have seen the cables yet. They weren't in the last video. So these are from NSourced. NSourced does an amazing work. Shout out to Joey. He does a phenomenal job every time. So I keep using him, and he picked out the color combination himself, the color scheme and the pattern. I kind of just trust him nowadays. Like I'm like, you know, like I'll just tell him what the theme is, what colors I'm using, and trust that he'll do a bang up job. And he always does. They look beautiful. They look really, really nice. So I think at this point, we're pretty much ready to finish this off. We have the tubes that need to go in, and then we have to fill the loop. And I think that's it. That's really it. So buckle up, guys. This is going to be one of the most epic builds that I've ever put together. I'm really excited to see how it turns out. I'm sure you are too. Let's get on to it. After many months of you guys waiting around, Chrometheus is finally done. There's a lot to say here. I'm gonna start with how it looks. I think it turned out beautiful. You guys let me know what you think, but this may be one of the sexiest builds I've ever put together. No, is one of the sexiest builds I've ever put together. I absolutely know it, and holy schmoly. Like, look at how just straight those bends are. So stinking fresh. All right, so yeah, distro plate definitely helped a ton. I can't take all the credit. Sort of cheating. It feels like you're cheating when you use a distro plate. It really does, because it just makes it so streamlined across the board. Even up here with the radiators, I think those look, these bends look really good too. Again, I did not bend these, remember? They're all pre-bent, but I did cut them to size. And I did bend the templates, the PET templates that were used to cut and measure these. So I'll pat myself on the back for that. I really do think it all came together pretty beautifully though. I think the Tough Ram from Thermal Take does really well in here. It just kind of matches everything else. That monoblock is redonkulous, and I think just the metal tubes really bring everything together. I remember for a moment there I was thinking that I would just stick with the PET templates because they look so good already when they were installed in the build, but I'm so glad that I moved forward and went ahead with the metal tubing because it really does make a huge difference. This build would not be Chrometheus if it weren't for all that brass. And I just realized the system isn't even on. Let's power it on. If you guys can't tell, I'm shooting this before all the sexy B-roll because we still got the plastic wrap on the front there. Doing things a little out of order here, but you'll notice that the system doesn't look a whole lot different powered on than when it's off. Fans are spinning, of course, except that one for some reason. I'll have to get back to that one later. I'm sure it's just come unplugged or whatever. But as far as lighting and RGB goes, virtually none. The only sliver of lighting on this whole system is right here at the front of the case. Outside of that though, no RGB. A fully RGB-less system. Well, fully with an asterisk. But yeah, I think it looks great. I don't think it needs any lighting in here. It just kind of stands on its own and it just makes it look even more industrial in my opinion to not have any sort of illumination. In case you're wondering, there are 4 RGB elements in here, 4 main RGB elements that I could turn on if I wanted to, which are the distro plate, which actually lights up like in full from top to bottom. It looks pretty cool lit up. We also have the GPU, which lights up at the end, although I did replace the end of it, the end of this EK vector water block with a blacked out one. The stock end piece is actually somewhat see-through. It's like sort of semi-opaque and allows light to bleed through, but I swapped it for the black one to stealth it out. And we also have the monoblock that's supposed to light up. I just pulled the plug on that because who cares? And then the motherboard, of course. Like little elements like the Zenith 2 badge up there or that area, as well as like around the chipset fan, chipset heatsink area, which you can't really even see behind all that stuff anyway. So those are the 4 RGB elements that I more or less pulled the plug on, and I couldn't be happier about it. There are some status LEDs still in the system, but those don't count. You may have noticed that our motherboard is spitting out our CPU temp and saying it's around 41C, which I would take with a big grain of salt. I rarely ever trust monitoring OLEDs and things like that on various components because I never really know what sensor they're hooked up to or how they're measuring it. I usually just go into the OS and look at hardware info because I know for a fact that that's accurate. But unfortunately, I cannot do that right now because, drumroll, the build doesn't boot. Chrometheus isn't working. That's right, all of this work, all of this time, and I can't even get a friggin' boot with this guy. Why? Why is that? Well, here, let me rewind a little bit. So, seeing how earlier you saw the close-up shots of me like putting the tubes in, inserting the tubes, and filling up the distro plate and stuff. Well, after I did all that, and I booted it for the first time, I got a black screen. No video signal whatsoever, and I believe the OLED was saying like postcode error or something, which is super specific. That's kind of the opposite of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give you a code that you can then look up to help troubleshoot, but it just said something generic. So I started going crazy and started doing some more troubleshooting. I tweeted about it to see what people might say. Jay mentioned that the tension, the mounting tension of the monoblock on Threadripper can sometimes pose an issue with posting. So I ended up draining the loop right after I filled it. I undid all the tubes and ripped out the motherboard assembly in order to remount the monoblock. And that still didn't work. Didn't do anything. So I started troubleshooting other things. I replaced all the memory and then I replaced the GPU. That's when it worked. After I swapped out the graphics card, our RTX 2080 Ti was the issue apparently. I swapped it out for like an air-cooled GTX 1070 and boom, instantly booted. No problems into the BIOS. So then I was like, okay, well, what's going on here? Is it maybe not making proper contact with the PCIe slot? So I put the GTX 1070 in one of the other slots, boom, booted again. I tried this GPU in another slot, didn't work. So at that point I was pretty convinced that the GPU was the culprit, which is my bad, I guess, because I didn't really test boot it ever since I got it. It pretty much went straight from the retail box to having a GPU block installed onto it to being put into the system. That's my bad. I've never had this issue where a GPU just did not work right out of the box, and a really high-end graphics card, no less. But this is a lesson to be learned, that if you're gonna be doing a build like this, a custom water-cooled loop system, test boot all the things, not just the motherboard and CPU and memory. Test the components that you're almost positive would never cause you any issues, because there's a first for everything. And today it was a first for me, and it really sucked. I spent about over 2 hours, between 2 and 3 hours, troubleshooting and ripping everything out, unplugging everything, and draining. Like it's so time consuming whenever you have to take something out of a build like this and put everything back. So I learned a valuable life lesson today, the hard way. And that means a few different things for Chrometheus, doesn't it? For starters, I can't really show you guys any of the performance numbers like I wanted to. I'm bummed because I wanted to see them for myself. I really wanted to see the load temperatures on the CPU, the GPU. I wanted to do an acoustic test with it under load, and obviously give you guys some performance numbers with things like rendering and gaming perhaps, but I can't do that today. It's a real bummer. The other thing is that since Ampere's right around the corner at this point, in fact, it might already have been announced, most likely by the time you see this on YouTube, I'm probably not going to replace this with another RTX 2080 Ti. I might as well just go with an RTX 3000 series GPU. Which one yet? I don't know. I feel like it's gotta be the 3090, right? In order to make it super epic, but we'll just have to wait and see what's available, what I can get. And that's gonna be tricky at first, I think, because I don't know if there's gonna be water blocks available for those cards right out of the gate. And once they come out, who's to say that this is all gonna line up the same? They might be a completely different design where the inlets and outlets are, spaced differently, and I might have to redo some runs. It's gonna be a whole can of worms, that's for sure. So you guys will just have to stay tuned for another follow-up video, because Chrometheus, while it's technically done right now, it's kind of not done at the same time, which is sort of bittersweet in the sense where I'm glad that I got to this point and we can kind of see it powered up in all of its glory, sort of the way that I initially envisioned it. But now it's about to embark on this next chapter that I was not expecting. And I guess that's kind of exciting to know that it's really not 100% finished yet. It might give me an opportunity, for example, to swap out these radiators for the really badass chrome finished ones from Heat Killer. I think it's from Heat Killer, I believe. So something like that. Other things that I could probably add in here to really amp things up. I guess I have an opportunity to do that now. Now, like I said, one of the big takeaways for me for this build was to test boot everything. But another thing that I learned that I think is a big one is that metal tubing is really not as intimidating as it seems. I was really kind of nervous and very intimidated to start working with it for the first time, but at the end of the day, it was way easier than I thought. As long as you have the proper tools, which are fairly easy to acquire and relatively cheap, and you have a good guide, like a good tutorial or maybe someone helping you out who knows what they're doing, it's pretty straightforward. And there's actually some benefits, I think, with using this, apart from it looking really cool. It doesn't scratch, like this brass tubing does not scratch nearly as easily as PET, particularly when you're trying to cap the fittings. Like when the cap of the fitting is loose, it's just like, freely sliding around here. If you just so much as like bump it against the tubing, if it's PET, it'll immediately put a scratch in it or put a mark in it. And sometimes you'll have like all these little micro scratches from your fitting as it's kind of moving up and down the tube as you're working with it, but not so much here. You really have to kind of press into it a bit more in order for it to actually leave a permanent mark, which I think is a real big benefit. Having more durable parts to work with, more durable materials, ends up giving you a cleaner looking build. But of course, there are those notable shortcomings that come with metal tubing as well. For starters, it's a bit more expensive than PET, just on a per foot or per meter basis. And then you are more limited with the runs you can do because you only get these pre-bent 90-degree options. You can't do 2 bends in a single run like you can with PET. It's just not quite as flexible in that sense, just so you don't get a bunch of corrosion and buildup in your loop months down the line. But apart from that, it was a really great experience. Cutting it was super easy, and I'm just thrilled. I'm really thrilled with how it turned out. I'm gonna take this off now. Doing it for you guys, and a little bit for myself. Yeah, buddy! Oh! One more for safety. Oh God, yeah. All right, so there she is, guys. You let me know what you think. Another custom loop build under my belt. I think this is like the 7th or 8th custom loop build that I've ever put together. Ever, like 7th or 8th. Not many, but I'm getting up there, almost in the double digits, and I can feel myself getting a bit more confident with each build as I learn more and get more experience with this sort of thing. So again, thank you guys so much for supporting me and for watching this series. I know that it took a lot longer than any of us expected, so I really appreciate you guys hanging in there and being patient. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Toss a like before you go. Get subscribed for more tech content on the way, and I will see you guys in the next video.